we're going to go ahead and read chapter 10 of our book we're reading together, Gathering Blue. I'm going to start daily read alouds just because I want to get through this book. We're going to move, after we finish our argumentative, which is almost over, we're going to move into kind of learning a little bit about the Holocaust. And so my read aloud book, I'm going to do a poll on teams for you and give you some options, but our book will be about, our next read aloud book will be about the Holocaust. So because of that, I'm going to start to do some daily read aloud. So this is chapter 10 of Gathering Blue. Remember, you can get access to Gathering Blue by just Googling Gathering Blue free online book. And then I'll be stopping to talk about the signposts as I read. And then if we remember where we left off, Matt was trying to sneak onto the male hunting team. And Kira had a premonition from her cloth that her and Thomas had to stop him because it was going to be very dangerous. So it was like a whoa, kind of where we realized that there's a magical element to it. Chapter 10. It was difficult to get through the crowd. Kira followed Thomas, who was taller than she was, as he pushed to make a path through the shouting, raucous men. Raucous is loud, and so shouting is our context clue for that. She recognized some. The butcher was there, cursing as he argued with another man. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. She recognized some. The butcher was there, cursing as he argued with another man, and she could see her mother's brother, too, in the group comparing the weights of the weapons with loud, bragging comments. Kira had not been much in the world of men. They led very separate lives than the lives of women. She had never envied them. Now as she found herself jostled by their thick, sweating, smelling bodies, and she heard their muttered, angry comments and their shouts, she found herself both frightened and annoyed. She realized that this was hunt behavior, a time for flaunting and boasting, a time for testing each other. No wonder Matt, with his childish swagger, had wanted to become part of it. A light-haired man with blood smeared on his arm turned from a shoving match and grabbed at her as she hurried by. "Here's a trophy," she heard him call out, but his companions were preoccupied with their argument. Using her walking stick as a prod, she pushed the man away and wrenched her wrist free from his grasp. "You shouldn't be here," Thomas whispered when she caught up with him. They had almost reached inside the square where they had spotted Matt. "It's only men, and this at hunt time they act brutish." Kira knew that. She could tell from the smell, the coarse quarreling, and the noise that this was not a place for girls or women. She kept her head lowered and her eyes on the ground, hoping not to be noticed, and grabbed again. "There's Brant," she pointed to the little dog, who recognized her and wagged his crooked stub of a tail. "Matt will be nearby." With Thomas beside her, she pushed her way through and found him still prancing with his spear. Its sharp point end was dangerously close to the other tykes. "Matt," she called in a scolding voice. He saw her, waved and grinned. "I'm Matty now," he called, exasperated. Kira grabbed the spear shaft just above his hand. "You won't be two syllables for a long time, Matt," she said. "Thomas, take this." She removed the spear from Matt's hand and handed it carefully to the carver. "Yes, I'll be," Matt said, laughing and proud. "Looky here, I got me a manly pelt." The little boy raised both arms above his head to show her his joke. Kira looked. His underarms were thick with some kind of growth. "What is that?" she asked him. Then she wrinkled her nose. "It smells terrible." "Gross." "Matt, that's swamp grass. It's awful stuff." "What do you mean, plastering yourself with it?" She could see that he smeared it on his chest as well. Thomas handed the spear to a man who grabbed it eagerly. He looked down at Matt, who was wriggling under Kira's hands on his shoulders. "You look like a beast boy. What do you say, Kira? I think it's time we showed Matt the bathroom. Shall we clean him up and wash his second syllable name away? At the word wash, Matt wiggled harder, trying to get free. But Thomas and Kira both helped him, and finally he allowed Thomas to pick him up and carry him over his shoulders, towering over the crowd. Now that the dangerous fascination of the spear was gone, Matt's group of young admirers dispersed. Kira could hear Matt calling his perch above the noisy shoving man, "Looky here at the beast boy!" No one looked or cared. She found Branch underfoot and picked him up to keep him safe from so many trampling feet. Carrying the dog tucked under her free arm, Kira leaned on her stick and followed Thomas. They edged their way around the crowd and looked back at the quiet of the building's corridors. Kira listened, laughed to the wails and whimpers as Thomas mercilessly scrubbed both Matt and Branch in his bathroom tub. "Not me hairs, too!" Matt howled in protest as Thomas poured water over his tangled mop of hair. "You're drowning me!" Finally, with Matt pink-faced and subdued, his washed hair toweled into a halo and his clean body wrapped in a bright blanket, they shared their meal. Branch shook himself briskly, as he had just played in the stream, and then settled himself on the floor and nibbled the scraps as they handed it to him. Matt sniffed warily at his own hand and grimaced. "That soapy is horrid awful," he said, "but I like the food," he offered, and filled his plate again. After dinner, Kira brushed her hair while he complained loudly. Then she held a mirror for him. Mirrors had been new to her too when she came to live, and they gave an image different from the stream reflection that she had all known of herself. Matt examined his own image with interest, wrinkling his nose and raising his eyes. He showed his teeth, growled at the mirror, and startled Branch, who was sleeping under the table. "I be so fierce," Matt announced smugly. "You should have drowned me, I fought so fierce." Finally, they redressed him in raggedy clothing. He looked at himself, then he reached suddenly for the leather thong around Kira's neck. "Gimme," he said. She pulled back, annoyed. "Don't, Matt," she told him, and pulled her necklace loose from his hand. "Don't grab. If you want something, you should ask." "Gimme isn't ask," he pointed out, puzzled. "No, it isn't. You should learn some manners. Anyway," Kira added, "you can't have it. I told you it was special." "A gift," Matt said. "Yes, a gift from my father to my mother, so she'd like him best." Kira laughed. Maybe so, but she already liked him best. "I want a gift. I never be having one." Laughing, Thomas and Kira gave him a smooth bar of soap, which he tucked solemnly into his pocket. Then they turned him loose. By then, the men and the spears were gone. They watched from the window as the small figure, followed by his dog, crossed the deserted plaza and disappeared into the night. Alone with Thomas, Kira tried to explain the warning that had come to her from the cloth. "It creates a funny feeling in my hand," she exclaimed hesitantly. "Look." She took it from the pocket and held it toward the light, but it was still now. She could feel a kind of comfort and silence from it, nothing like the tension that had stirred it earlier. But she felt disappointed that now it had seemed no more than a scrap of cloth. She wanted Thomas to understand. She sighed. "I'm sorry," she said. "It seems lifeless, I know, but there are times." Thomas nodded. "Perhaps the feeling for you is alone," he said. "Here, I'll show you my bit of wood." He went to a shelf above the table where he kept the tools and took down a piece of light-colored pine small enough to fit into the palm of his hand. So I think that this is a meeting the mentor moment, so we can log it as a signpost, meeting the mentor. The text we're going to use is right here that I'm pointing to. Thomas said... Thomas nodded. "Perhaps the feeling is for you alone." This is a meeting the mentor moment because Thomas is going to explain that he gets similar feelings from his own art projects, which is going to help her feel like she understands the kind of big question of why her cloth gives the feeling of emotions, kind of how it connects the two of them together. Kira could see that it was intricately decorated with carved designs that interwove around it in a complicated curves. You curved this when you were just a tyke? She asked him in surprise. She had never seen anything so extraordinary. The boxes and ornaments that were on his work table, beautiful in their own way, were much simpler than this small piece. Thomas shook his head. I had to, he explained. I was learning to use the tools. I began to try them on this small chunk of wood that had been discarded, and he hesitated. He stared at the wood as if it was mystified him still. It carved itself? Kira asked. It did. It seemed to, at least. It was the same for me in the cloth. That is why the cloth speaks to you. The wood speaks in the same way. I can feel it in my hands. Sometimes it warns you? Kira asked, remembering how the cloth had seemed to tense and tremble when she saw Matt holding the spear. So we could put this as tough questions, and the quote warns you, only because she's asking questions about Thomas's experiences, because she's realizing that he also has this kind of magic going throughout him as well. So it's kind of connecting them together. Thomas nodded. And it calms me, he added. When I came here so young, sometimes I was very lonely and frightened, but the feeling of the wood was calming. Yes, the cloth is soothing at times too. I feel it fearful I was fearful here at first, the same as you, with everything so new. But now when I held the scrap, I feel reassured. She thought for a moment, trying to picture what this life in the edifice must have been like for Thomas, who was brought here very young. I think it's easier for me because I am not alone, as you were, she told him. Jameson comes here every day to look at my work, and I have you just around the corner. The two friends sat silently for a moment. Then Kira replaced the cloth in her pocket and rose from her chair. I must go to my room, she said. There's so much work to do. Thank you for helping me with Matt, she added. He's a naughty tyke, isn't he? Thomas, returning his carved piece to the shelf, agreed with a grin. Horrid naughty, he said, and then laughed together with the affection for their little friend. All right, that was chapter 10. I'll be reading chapter 11 tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody.